Hopefully we can get a lot of good questions and answers in. Got two of our speakers up here. I'm actually going to have Joe Vanevenhoven come up as well. You guys have not yet met him, so I'm going to let him introduce himself, and then we'll just get rolling with the questions.
Sure. Thanks, Chris. So first, I'd like to really commend everyone who's here. I mean, if we think about our professional lives, we're really trying to build a learning organization back at our shop or back at our hospital or back at our organization. And so I think everyone here individually is doing that today. So I've got a background pretty similar to Craig and Chris. Industrial engineer by background, went to Marquette University. Really got bit by the lean bug back in about 2006 when I worked at Plexus Corporation in Neenah as an industrial engineer. Worked for Ministry Healthcare, now Ascension Health. So 5 years of experience, continuous improvement in manufacturing, and now 7 years within healthcare. So that's my background, and looking forward to your questions.
So I talked to Monica and Craig earlier, and I said, well, you guys did a presentation. You had to prepare all this, so we're really going to nail Joe hard on the Q&A. So, all right. Oh, Sarah, very quick.
I have a question for Monica. So, Mr. Worthy says he's got this attitude anyway about improving things. He's always being very innovative. Does he have any background in lean, or what kind of personality does he have that he, I guess, educates himself, and how would you say to inspire that other business owners and top management to embrace lean?
Sure. So Tim actually has a background in industrial. He actually has a background in industrial engineering also, and so I think part of that, obviously, he was. You've shown that in his schooling, and obviously in his journey as far as taking over the company and really exploring the technology that is out there, that is available to a manufacturing environment. And so I think that by nature, I don't want to say that he's a dreamer, but I think that he has a goal or a sight in mind that he wants to get to, and really surrounding himself with people who also share that passion for change and that passion for success, I think is really how he is spreading that message and changing that culture within the company. Also, I had said that Worth Company is a humble company, and really what that means is that we are really listening to our operators and to our employees. We can say that we have a good program for that, work to life, situation that our employees are dealing with, but really walking that walk and talking that talk with them, letting them know that we want them to be successful, because we want them to help the Worth Company be successful. However you deliver that message, if it's in department meetings, if it's employee evaluations, if it's your day-to-day interactions. I will say that Tim Worth, while he's director of operations and he has a lot going on, he is very visible out in the factory. Once a day at a minimum, but probably a couple of times a day. He knows his operators by name. Not everybody's afforded that, but we are all afforded the opportunity to be visible, to lend that ear to our employees, to see, I think, I don't remember who I was talking to, maybe John, asking that question to an employee, what frustrates you? Open that door to let them know that you are interested, and as much as we can follow up on that, obviously the better.
Kent, did you have one in the back?
Yeah. How do you prioritize what you're going to work on? Knowing that there's a bunch of things and not
This is really where having that executive buy-in, I think, is key. So in one role was really leading operations improvement right in Stevens Point here at St. Michael's Hospital. And so what's important to avoid is basically saying, okay, we've got 5 or 6 highly talented up-and-coming leaders that we want to train and have them do projects, right? So I think it's important to avoid saying, okay, have them all go out and find a project, right? So it's basically, let's avoid doing these disparate projects that really don't lead us to our end goal. And so basically, what we had with our executive committee is we had our current state at the hospital level. We had an opportunity funnel, which was really, these are the things that we need to address. We know operationally, here's our future state, here's our balanced scorecard. So when we identified those high-performing leaders, it was really figuring out, okay, how do they work on the right things that are going to impact our balanced scorecard and get us from our current state to our future state, rather than, you know what, that's a person who's highly skilled in the lab. Let's have them take on some project in the lab. Does that make sense? So just making sure that really where the company's going and tying it in with the strategic planning to make sure that the projects align and address those issues.
Ditto. And so the other side of my hat that I didn't talk about today is I actually do have leadership over the strategic planning and execution process. So we build all of our improvement priorities into our strategic plan and into our annual operating plans, and our key metrics that are a part of that strategic planning process are the high level outcome metrics for our improvement activities. So we're very it doesn't determine the what you do, but it determines the what you should be focusing on, and then the activities within that, as long as they are showing that they have an impact to that target we're chasing, we're happy to resource and figure out how to be successful at.
Possibly if there is an area that you have maybe some employee turnover, if you have a particular area or a department that nobody wants to work in, or that there's a high stress level, that's sometimes if you don't have that strategic planning, if you don't have that executive management reviews happening, using maybe a different indicator that you have a particular area that could use some help. Obviously, if you have defects coming out of a process anywhere, that would be a pretty obvious place to start too, if it's at that level.
So I'm going to comment on this one too. That was actually obviously a broad spectrum of responses depending on, if you have a strategic planning process and you have some of these things in place versus maybe you're just beginning. And one thing I always say, if you're just starting, think of things that take a long time and shouldn't, or things that have a lot of errors and you don't know why. Like that use those two criteria, start making the list, and then try to decide, which one of these is easiest to fix, especially if you're a smaller operation and you don't have a team of engineers that can go looking at these projects. If it's just you running the show and a handful of other people, let's free up our own time and get that ball rolling so that we can focus more of our effort on additional improvements. So I guess, Kent, there's a lot of angles to the answer to that question, but
Would you also agree that when you do I don't want to say simpler things, but you tackle the ones that you can achieve sooner, that then it creates that environment that you get more buy-in from your team players, your employees, and things like that, that then you have a larger team to then tackle the harder, more time involved.
Yeah, absolutely. There's a huge cultural momentum component to a continuous improvement program. And one of the things I like to compare it to is a snowball on top of a large mountain. And if that snowball is our free time, like who here has free time? Raise your hand. Right? Sarah's probably a little bit, right? I mean, it's not like, oh, what am I going to do today? Everybody's got a full calendar, but if you can free up 1 minute today for one person, that snowball starts to roll, and then suddenly you free up 2 or 3 minutes for 3 people or 10 minutes for 5 more people. That snowball starts gaining a lot of momentum and a lot of size. You're starting to free up more free time. You can invest that into value-added things for your customer or additional improvements. Yes, or 6 hours for Symposium. Okay. Question.
How can you dummy this down, let's say, for nonprofits and so forth that have, a small staff and a volunteer board that is going to try to get this done? I mean, how do you dummy it down to make it, without getting them completely into the weeds of what you do every day? I mean, or do you have to?
I'll take this one.
So one of my other hats that I wear is I'm actually on a couple of board of directors for some nonprofits and like to volunteer my ideas for them in their offices. One of the most impactful, I think, has been a group called Reap Food Group. They're a local nonprofit that does a lot of work in the sustainability and access space for food. And what we kind of have been working towards is it's the same methodology, right? You all have lists of a million things you want to accomplish, and in the nonprofit world, at least for them, it's less about maybe about the product that you have, right? We're not making food. That's actually sometimes they are making food, but that's a different story. But they're affecting policy, right? And so it's about kind of honing that down and then saying, well, let's line up the process that you need to go through in order to actually get this implemented or to actually deliver this service. So it's a lot of the same mentality. And I think I found, at least with that particular group, that they're way more receptive because they're there for a higher cause, where sometimes in large organizations you run into the barrier of people are there because it's a good paycheck or because they can't leave because it's their source of income and they don't have another source, right? And so some of those nonprofits have a lot more energy behind, I want to get better at what I'm doing. So I don't think there's any tricks necessarily, but I'd say the same kind of thought process of like, how do you look at a big problem and start to break it into manageable chunks to do improvements around still works, still is applicable. And we're a nonprofit too, just a really huge one.
Yeah, and the other thing I would say, and I think Chris touched on it when he talked about lean and really the value. And so that value is always defined by our customer. So starting with, just think of the customers to your nonprofit, how they determine that value. And you talk about a small staff and, a lot of tasks that they've got to do. And just trying to get the group to shift from 100% being task oriented and a bunch of tactical things that need to get done to starting with that shift of we're going to allocate 20% of our time towards improvement work and 80% of our time to getting the tasks done. And I think just by starting with that, keeping in mind what's the value we create to our customers, I think the ideas will start to come, and you'll start to build that learning organization.
This is more of a question than a question on top of. For the two presenters, I was struck by the common thread in yours. While you were talking about metrics, okay, each of you had, we got from this down to that. That was great. That's what a lot of people want to hear. At your core, you had a whole lot of hearts and minds to change. And had you not been able to do that, you wouldn't have gotten the metrics. And in fact, that soft, squishy stuff is a lot harder to do than crunch numbers in Epic or follow the dollars or anything like that. You can't get that part done. So I'm curious, I'll turn this into a question. What did you have to do? You persuaded that guy who resisted doing another 5S or resisted doing a Kaizen event. In fact, to almost leading it, right? He was the major player. What worked, and how can you bottle that and sell to everybody in this room?
Okay, here's the secret to selling it. No, I think that I'm going to go really back to really speaking their language. Had that situation been, we take the guys from the press room, we bring them up front, we put them in the conference room, we get up the slide projector and we say, we're going to get you yellow belt trained. They're like, well, I don't want to be yellow belt trained. And we're going to tell you, teach you what the Gemba is. We're going to do Kaizen and we're going to get some Kanbans out in your press room. And they're like, I don't want any Kanbans. I don't want any part of that. But really, obviously the process of a project starts way before the first day of the project. And it really is, number one, they all know that they probably have weaknesses or problems in their process. And it really starts with getting them to realize what those problems are and that there is an opportunity to make them better, that there is an opportunity to change. Lending that ear, saying, I am listening to your problems, I am listening to your difficulties in the day, and I want to help you. So taking a numbers approach to it, so looking at your metrics, taking a process as a Kaizen process, the DMAIC process, and really being regimented as to we're just going to use these tools so that we know that we are hitting everything on the head, that we're looking at everything, that we're getting everybody's opinion involved, and we're really getting down to the root cause. If they're investing their time, they want a good outcome also. And just letting them know that a full buy-in from them is going to really determine whether or not this is going to be a good project or a bad project. But also that when we went into this Kaizen, for me, it was very important that the Kaizen team did not know that we were looking for a 15-minute setup time. If I would have went in there and said, right now you're taking 70 minutes, almost 70 minutes to do a setup, and the company owner wants you to do it in 15, and we're not giving you new presses, and we're not giving you more operators, what kind of buy-in would that really be? And so the process of Kaizen, as its name suggests, it's small changes for the good, and really that's what it is. Even when the day that the Kaizen ended, we were not at 17 minutes at that point. We had some newspaper items to take care of over the next couple of days and the next couple of weeks. But that small changes, the first day after the Kaizen, and they went out there and they grabbed a die that was actually already sharpened, that was actually ready to go in the press, they were sold because it worked. There was a lot of hiccups after that. Obviously, there's some roadblocks to overcome, and there were bad days. But over time, after that project, the successes added up, and they were living it. We were supporting them, saying, "Nope, that actual change isn't working so well. What could we do differently?" So it's a living change. You're obviously monitoring it after that project rolls out, listening to the operators, saying, we wanted you to try it, you tried it, it's now working, let's take a look at it again. So again, making sure that your operators are involved, whoever is using that process, and making sure that there's that communication. I'm not a big fan of meetings and that non-essential time that is value added supposedly, but develop some way to communicate. If it's a comments binder for 30 days after your project rolls out, so if they come across something and you're not available, they can at least jot it down and they know that you're going to be looking at it. And so communication is kind of the weakness, I think, of everybody's problems, or so it seems, but making sure that that is open for them during, before, and after the project.
How did you win the hearts and minds of those physicians?
Help them.
So, and I heard that, yeah, a lot of
Yeah, I mean, really, we do two things. One is we lead with the right reason, right? So docs are stressed. They got a lot of work to do, and we went out and we wanted to help them. And the second piece is really a lot of what was already referenced is we went out. We got to where they were and understood what was going on and figured out ways to be useful and be helpful. And I was telling Chris as I walked up here, after you start, it becomes that snowball he was referencing. Right before we started this panel, I got an email that was sent out to all 160 some odd primary care providers that said, "Hey, I checked your analytics and it checks out. You did help us. All 7 of my patients that you told me were on this list for a reason. They're there for a reason. So you were right." And he sent it to the entire region of providers, which now I know not a single one of them is going to go and double check the work that was already done for them. They'll just say, okay, we should do something. We should do something different because they trust each other.
Yeah, and the other thing I would add is just there's a slide I remember just from coaching people through projects. So really the effectiveness of the change, it's really the function of the quality of the solution, which obviously in both instances they came up with a good plan, but it's multiplied times the acceptance of the solution, right? And so there's one slide that I always like to use, and basically it's a timeline, And so as you plan out your project, what are the things we're going to do to come up with the right quality of solutions? So we're going to have a charter, we're going to get to root cause, we're going to understand our baseline data. That's all the DMAIC stuff. But then underneath that, it's what are the things we're going to do to get that acceptance? So think about the change management process. And so there's all sorts of different change management processes, but what are we going to do to create that sense of urgency? What are we going to do to focus the vision? What are we going to do to get stakeholder buy-in? And so I think it's really about being planful about how to do that. In each project, the answers to doing that are going to be different.
Yeah, and I'll just add, when I look at change, and Joe hit on it a little bit, change isn't something that just happens. It's a process. And there is actually a Japanese term in the lean world called nimawashi, which has to do with literally transplanting a tree from one spot to the next. So when you do that, you don't just grab it by the trunk and rip it out of the ground and then stuff it in a hole across on the other side of the yard and then kind of cover it up and walk away, right? It's shocking for the little tree. It's probably not going to survive, and if it does, a lot of trauma. But sometimes we treat change that way. We behind the scenes kind of do the work, figure everything out, and then the curtain lifts and you're like, surprise, you guys are doing this now. And that never works because the people aren't bought into it. They haven't, if nothing else, it just takes them off guard. So change has to start early on in any type of a process. And I always say when you have a problem and it's a known organizational problem, at some level we all agree that that's a problem. We might not agree how to fix it. But if you zoom out and say, is this a problem? Yeah, this isn't a problem for all of us. Okay, well now this is a team game. We're all going to play together and we're going to figure this out. We've got tools to use, and communicating, like Monica and Craig even said, communicate all the way through. No secrets. We're not playing poker. We're not trying to keep cards close to our vest. And if they play that card, we're going to play this card. We're really going to look at this problem and agree on it and figure out the best course of action. And we're all human beings. So let's treat each other like human beings and build that trust. And I think change goes a lot more effectively that way.
I'd just like to comment, with every project I worked on, all of the team members, I ask this question from their perspective. What's in it for me? Because if you can identify and enunciate how you are going to make their lives better, their jobs easier, buy-in just got 10 times easier than it was going to be. Then you don't have to convince them. They will convince themselves. And they'll be much more apt to participate. The other thing is as my sensei, his motto was always steal shamelessly and cite generously, meaning that I always use any good idea wherever I came across it, but I always make sure that those people get credit. One instance, we had taken on a project where we literally had to design a machine for something that I could not find someone to do. And got some of the maintenance guys involved, and then a couple people off the floor, and we developed a machine to grind circular or semicircular blades. Hadn't been done before. We were able to do it cheaper and actually make more money on it than our customers had been able to do it ourselves. And when our company president came and told me, he said, "That's really a great idea you came up with." I said, "See those two guys over there?" I said, "You need to tell them that."
All right, I think we have time for one more. Were you raising your hand before? Don't be shy. No, just kidding. Okay.
What I would just comment on doctor buy-in or provider buy-in, as an organization that works in that realm, we typically ask the doc, what do you think is stupid in this process after mapping it? They're usually pretty vocal about that. Willing to participate in that. So, yeah, if you just ask the right question, I think you'll get buy-in. And they'll listen to feedback after that. So.
Anybody taking the last question? Okay. How about when you have these brainstorming events, whether it's at the doctor level or the shop floor employee level, trying to solve the issue? Either two doctors or two employees have two different routes on how to accomplish that end task that might not have a glaring difference between the two up front as far as the outcome. How do you select one or the other, or work to combine the two to not alienate just one person, either or even try to combine the two to try to keep them both involved.
We try it. Everything that was talked about, hopefully you got the impression that we started really big, but then as we get to aims and interventions, it gets really small. So take the example of doing a triage. If there was, one person who had 4 questions that thought it would be best and one person that had 2, we'd put them both into practice. And on the other side, when we had done it for a week or 2 weeks or a month or whatever we had agreed upon, we'd get back together and decide which one was better, and we'd go with that one.
Do you know there's a word for that?
There's a word for that. No.
It's called tri-storming. So we brainstorm a whole lot of words. So we also tri-storm these things also. That's probably just my word, but I'll let all of you use it.
I shall cite it, though, as I've been told.
Right, and I think just again, effective change management. It's going to require good facilitation skills. So that, again, there's tools in the facilitation realm when you've got a group that has differing opinions to get them to consensus. And the other piece of it, if you're leading it, and in Craig and I's cases, in a lot of instances, we're engineers in healthcare, kind of a fish out of water. Certainly to stay that neutral facilitator. So if there's something and it's related to what medication is going to be used or how to do any of those things, we stay very neutral. We try and just make sure we follow a disciplined process to come to the solution, rather than getting in the world of politics and getting people to rally around a certain cause. Does that make sense?
Okay, 11 o'clock. Before we wrap things up, I really want to thank Kevin for the facility and sponsoring the day here. And all his help he brought in. Notice the photography going on, videography, all that other stuff. Really appreciate it. Thank our speakers who came from, Monica here in Point, but across the state, all 3 of them. So please give them a round of applause. And then lastly, thank you all for showing up. Again, I love being in a room of people. I feel like these breaks weren't nearly long enough because the conversations were just flowing. We all kind of have that same mindset. We want to make things better for ourselves, for our organizations, and ultimately for our communities, right? With better employment, better services delivered, whatever that might be. So it was a pleasure spending the morning with you all. I'm going to send some follow-up emails with the, I don't remember who asked the question, and Dave, you asked that question. With all the materials we covered today, I'm also going to have some follow-up questions because we have talked about doing potentially another one of these in the fall. So just kind of trying to figure that whole thing out. So I think that's everything on the list. So thank you all for coming, and enjoy the rest of the day.